A haunted and overgrown Spanish mission, a sprawling city park where monsters lurk, and an iconic ghost town harboring the spirits of those claimed by its violent past await on this journey through some more of California's most paranormally plagued places. Let's jump right in. Hey guys, and thanks for joining me on this adventure through some more of California's most haunted places. Recognized for its unbeatable beach towns, breathtaking state parks, countless attractions, historic landmarks, and more, the Golden State also boasts a much darker side, one wrought with classic ghost stories, tales of terrifying cryptids, and rumors of curses as old as the land itself. Are you ready to get started? Our first haunt lands us just off of the Southern California coastline at the iconic Mission San Juan Capistrano. Mission San Juan Capistrano, which is located in San Juan Capistrano, California, in the heart of Orange County, is a historic Spanish Catholic mission that's grown wildly in popularity amongst tourists, photographers, and parishioners seeking to learn more about their religion's history, and whose bounds also act as home to a series of purported paranormal happenings and some downright bizarre legends. Historically, Mission San Juan Capistrano's roots were set on November 1st of 1776, when it was founded under Junipero Serra as the 7th of 21 missions to be established in California by the Spanish. Notably, an early mission project on-site was launched through October of 1775, but this first project was abandoned after only a week when a Kumeyaay war party attacked Mission San Diego, resulting in Spanish troops at Capistrano being ordered back to the city. Like many other missions of its day, San Juan Capistrano would act as a stronghold of Spanish influence, and was designed to push Spain's territorial boundaries further while also spreading Christianity. And over its years, it would convince various native parties to embrace Catholicism, while ingraining them into self-sustaining Spanish subjects and members of the colonial order. Sadly, nearly all of the native tribes in the region really didn't want to adopt this new lifestyle, which altered their cultures, language, religion, jobs, food, and daily schedules. And while it's estimated that around 65,000 Native Americans lived within the mission zone circa 1770, ultimately, when all was said and done, only around 17,000 remained. By 1812, Mission San Juan Capistrano would have begun a steady decline resulting from damages caused by a major earthquake the same year, as well as an overall decline in birth rates, an increase in mortality rates amongst Native Americans due to disease, and the fact that the Spanish government was simply not able to offer adequate protection. By 1821, Mexico would win its independence from Spain, resulting in Alta California falling under their rule. And finally, in 1845, Governor Pio Pico would actually sell the mission site at auction, resulting in it going on to act as private ranch lands. In 1850, California would earn its statehood, after which Bishop Joseph Alemany would petition for all standing missions to be returned to the Catholic Church. And in 1865, under none other than President Abraham Lincoln himself, this petition was granted. From the 1870s through the early 1900s, Mission San Juan Capistrano would grow rapidly in popularity as tourists, history buffs, photographers, and visionaries took interest in the site. In 1910, the mission would earn further renown when it hosted the first of many Hollywood productions to be shot on site, being the western Two Brothers. And a year later, the film's leading lady, Mary Pickford, would actually wed fellow actor Owen Moore right within its age-old chapel. Additionally, in 1919, the site was also chosen by author Johnston Macaulay, who created the now iconic character Zorro as a setting for his first novella, being what else but The Curse of Capistrano. In 1920, the Sacred Garden was created in the courtyard, and in 1925, a full restoration of the Serra Chapel was performed. In 1937, the National Park Service's Historic American Buildings Survey would complete a full survey of the mission, which would pave the way for future restorations, excavations, and a reconstruction of the western wing. And later, in 1971, the site would be added to the National Register of Historic Places. More recently, in 2002, the Great Stone Church made the World Monuments Fund's list of 100 most endangered sites. And 2 years later, in 2004, $7.5 million was spent on the construction of a series of seismic retrofits. In the present, Mission San Juan Capistrano remains open to the public and welcomes anywhere from 300,000 to 1 million visitors each year. It also continues to host a number of events, and for those interested, touring options are available. And while Capistrano is most known for its historic and religious significance, it may surprise some that it's also considered one of the most haunted places in the United States, with both officials and visitors reporting strange scraping and knocking sounds coming from the nearby cemetery, whose markers are also roamed by a mysterious woman in white, instances of objects across the property moving around inexplicably, and disembodied footsteps and voices heard emanating from thin air. One more famous tale tells of one Magdalena, who was actually killed in the aforementioned 1812 earthquake, and whose ghost, it's believed, was not ready to move on. Her beautiful spirit has been sighted rounding corners, and her face is often spied peering from various windows, especially after dark. The ghost of a headless soldier has been spied near the old garrison. The form of a faceless monk has been viewed through various corridors, and one spirit, dubbed Tobacco Tom, has been known to fill the air with the strong scent of tobacco when he manifests. Lastly, and not to be confused with the cemetery's resident spirit, another woman in white with a happy dog has been known to stroll Los Rios Street and sometimes the streets bordering the mission site. This spirit is often described as playful and has been known to greet visitors, tell funny stories, and let her ghostly pup attack younger children with cuddles and licks before they both fade away. Our second haunt takes us just to the south of Big Sur to the prestigious Hurst Castle. Hurst Castle, which is located in San Simeon in California, is a historic estate turned museum and California state park that's wildly popular amongst architecture enthusiasts, history buffs, and sightseers as one of the most prolific constructs in the country, and its bounds are surrounded by numerous tales of paranormal activity and encounters with the otherworldly. Historically, lands now holding Hurst Castle were, stretching back to prehistoric times, frequented by tribes native to the region, including the Salinans and the Chumash, who all utilized the thriving coastline as a place for settlement, for hunting and fishing, good climates, and fresh water. Later, through the 18th century, Spanish missions would begin sprouting up across the landscape, and most of the native populace was either killed, converted, or moved elsewhere. Following the Mexican-American War of 1846 to 1848, the region would subsequently fall under the control of the United States, and when the California Gold Rush hit later the same year, the area would be flooded by miners, prospectors, and big businesses looking to make a fortune. Born in Missouri in 1820, one George Hurst would grow up to work as a prospector, businessman, and eventual senator, and in 1865, he bought what was formerly known as La Piedra Blanca for the creation of a residence and surrounding grounds. Initially, through the 1870s, George would construct a ranch house on site, and the landscape would host activities such as family camping parties, expeditions, hunting, events, and more, all of which George partook in alongside his son, William Randolph Hearst. Sadly, George would pass on in 1891 and would leave his estate along with $18 million to William, an amount that today, in 2025, would be worth well over $500 million. The family would continue to frequent the Hearst estate for years, until the early 1910s, when William began dreaming of building a grand mansion on its grounds. In 1919, he would employ the help of the first independent female architect, Julia Morgan, and together, the two would begin construction of Hurst Castle, a process that would ultimately last around 28 years. By 1925, the castle was completed to a point that would allow for the family to move in. However, shortly afterwards, William's wife, Millicent, would return to New York. Now, it was no big secret that William held a mistress dear to his heart, and preceding his wife's move, and from that point forward, and all while still technically married, he would form an unbreakable relationship with actress Marion Davies, who would actually act as the chatelaine of the castle. Unfortunately for Hearst, the good times wouldn't last forever, and through the onset of the Great Depression and early 1930s, his fortune would wane, and he would rack up a debt totaling $126 million or so, resulting in ongoing construction of the castle ceasing except on a very limited basis. In 1945, construction would start up again for a time, but by just 1947, it would again be put on halt, and both Hearst and Davies would vacate the castle. Sadly, William would pass on in 1951, and, still spiteful over the affair, his family wouldn't allow Davies to attend his funeral. In 1958, the Hurst Corporation would donate the castle, its gardens, and most of its effects to the state of California. In 1972, it was added to the National Register of Historic Places, and in 1976, it was designated a United States National Historic Landmark. More recently, and rather unfortunately, in 2003, a massive earthquake would strike the region, with the epicenter landing just 3 miles north of Hurst Castle. Though surprisingly, damages were actually extremely limited, and this stands as testament to the ingenuity of Julia Morgan and William's ongoing work on his prized estate. Since its opening to the public, Hurst Castle has grown massively in popularity as one of California's most prestigious landmarks, and through the year of 2018 alone, it would welcome more than 850,000 visitors. In the present, the castle remains open to the public and hosts a multitude of events each year, while offering several touring options for any with an interest. Over its many years, ghost stories surrounding Hurst Castle have varied greatly, and both staff and visitors to its grounds have told of disembodied footsteps and voices heard from empty rooms, mysterious knocking sounds heard on doors, and the phantom smells of cologne, perfume, tobacco, and cooking foods without source. Easily one of the castle's most famous apparitions is none other than that of Marion Davies herself. While the aforementioned story may sound like some sort of scandal, in truth, Davies was the love of William Hurst's life, and she cherished their relationship so that in life, when Hurst fell upon hard times, she actually sold off her own hard-earned stocks and jewelry to bail him out. Following his death, he passed the castle down to Davies, and out of respect for the family, she sold the estate right back to the Hursts for a jaw-dropping sum of $1. It's said her love for William was so strong that her spirit stayed behind to find his, and when her story is told in the Gothic study or other rooms with hanging chandeliers, the lights above always begin to swing inexplicably. Lastly, the spirit of William Randolph Hearst himself has been sighted walking the halls of his castle, a satisfied look upon his face, and on rare occasions has been sighted after dark in more secluded areas, joined by the spirit of Davies, together into eternity as they whisper sweet nothings into each other's ears. And on to number 3, which has us straddling the California-Nevada border and braving the ghost town of Bodhi. The ghost town of Bodhi, which is located in Mono County, California, is the remains of a mid-19th century mining boomtown that's grown in recognition as a popular tourist destination for history buffs and those seeking a glimpse into what life was like for prospectors of the era, and its bounds are tied to a wealth of classic Old Hill folklore and stories of encounters with the inexplicable. Historically, following the 1859 discovering of gold through the region by a group of prospectors that included one W.S. Bodhi, roots for the town of Bodhi that we know today grew in the form of a small, unrecognized mining camp. Sadly, W.S. Bodhi would actually die in a blizzard the following November, and as such, would never live to see the town that derived its name from him. Incidentally, as this town grew, it would be known under several different iterations of said name, including Bodhi, Bodhi, and Bodhi. However, eventually, a sign was created for the Bodhi stables, and this version of the name was standardized from that point forward. In 1876, the Standard Company would discover a sizable deposit of gold-bearing ore in Bodhi, and once news spread, it would quickly grow from a mining camp into a boomtown. By 1879, the town's populace had grown from a handful of miners and workers to somewhere between 7,000 and 10,000 residents, and through its profitable years, it would go on to produce somewhere around $34 million of gold and silver. At its peak, the locale hosted a Wells Fargo bank, 4 volunteer fire companies, a brass band, a railroad, a miners and mechanics union, several daily newspapers, a jail, and a total of 65 saloons. Notably, like many other boomtowns, violence was a commonplace as men gave up their entire lives in search of fortune, and sometimes came up empty-handed. And barroom brawls, stagecoach robberies, shootouts, and even cold-blooded murder were a daily occurrence. Incidentally, over its years, and with a rising death toll, Bodhi also hosted an official city cemetery, as well as another burying ground called Boot Hill. Unfortunately, following the turn of the 20th century, mineral deposits around Bodhi would begin to dry up, resulting in various operations and prospectors moving elsewhere. In 1912, the last Bodhi newspaper, being the Bodhi Miner, was printed, and just a year later, in 1913, the Standard Consolidated Mine would close its doors. While some mining profits were made through 1914, they simply weren't enough to justify maintaining the community. And though in 1915, one James S. Cain would purchase and reopen Bodhi's standard mill for a time, money made through the mill just wasn't enough to keep the rest of the town afloat. In 1917, the Bodhi Railway was shut down. By 1920, the town's population was recorded at only 120 residents. In 1932, a severe fire would destroy a good portion of standing structures through the area. And in 1942, and due to the War Production Board, the last mine in Bodhi was ordered shut down and would never again reopen. After which, the same year, its post office would close its doors. Following its abandonment, through the remainder of the 40s, Bodhi would suffer at the hands of vandals and looters. In 1961, it was designated a National Historic Landmark, spurring interest in preservation efforts. And in 1962, state legislature authorized the creation of the Bodhi State Historic Park, ensuring the site's ongoing maintenance and preservation. In the present, Bodhi stands in what's known as a preserved state of arrested decay, with around 110 of its original structures still standing. It remains open to the public and is a popular stop for history enthusiasts, treasure hunters, dark tourists, and, you guessed it, ghost hunters. And rightfully so, as over its many years, both visitors and site officials have reported doors that open and close by themselves, lights and figures spied in long dormant structures, and encounters with ghostly miners during the day, as well as the sighting of their phantom mining lamps in the distance after dark. The whole of Bodhi is thought to hold the spirits of the many who died to the violence that was so common in its boom era, and some have told of phantom gunshots, screams, the sounds of fighting, and run-ins with an array of spirits, some that reenact various conflicts, and others who appear along the main stretch bearing bruises, scratches, bloody bullet holes, rope burns, or knife wounds. Near the Deschambault house, many tell of sightings of a spectral woman that stares from the upstairs window. The Mendicini house is said to be surrounded by the sounds of children's laughter, as well as the smells of the delicious Italian dishes that Mrs. Mendicini used to cook. And the J.S. Cain house is rumored to harbor the ghost of a former maid who loves children, but that tends to scare away adults or even push them physically from the property. Lastly, possibly the most famous Bodhi ghost story tells that the whole of the town site is cursed, and that anyone who takes so much as a single pebble from it will be stricken with the most horrendous spell of bad luck known to man that can result in bankruptcy, divorce, ailing health, or even dangerous accidents. Incidentally, about once a week, the state park offices receive envelopes from past guests containing objects taken from the area that are usually accompanied by apology letters from sorry visitors who experienced the effects of this curse firsthand. Number 4 takes us just to the south of Los Angeles to Long Beach's popular RMS Queen Mary. The RMS Queen Mary, which is now anchored in Long Beach, California, is a retired British ocean liner that enjoyed a long service lifespan as she transported countless passengers across the North Atlantic Ocean, that today stands as a popular historic venue for locals and tourists alike, and its decks have long been shrouded in chilling ghost stories and tales of strong paranormal activity. Historically, the RMS Queen Mary was originally constructed through the early 1930s in Scotland for use by the Cunard White Star Line and under shipbuilding firm John Brown and Company, after which her maiden voyage would transpire in May of 1936. Notably, the ship was named after wife of King George V, Mary Tech, who acted as Queen of the United Kingdom and Empress of India from 1910 to 1936, and the prestigious vessel would be fashioned in Art Deco style, with over 50 different types of wood from across the globe utilized throughout its interior. Additionally, it would boast amenities that were very bougie for the era, including 2 indoor swimming pools, a music studio, several libraries, paddle tennis courts, a telephone service that could connect passengers to friends and family from across the world, and a 3-story main dining room complete with a motorized crystal model of the ship that would display its journey's progress. Impressively, by August of the same year, the renowned vessel would win the Blue Riband, which is an accolade for transatlantic passenger liners with the highest average speeds, and would also earn renown for her unparalleled luxury and accommodations. Over the next 3 years, the RMS Queen Mary would continue to transport passengers in lavish style, but her future was about to change in a big way. Following the onset of World War II, Allied forces were in desperate need of additional transportation options, and the Queen Mary was selected to serve as a troop ship, following which she was basically gutted and transformed for the purpose. She would continue to serve as such until the end of the war, after which certain amenities were added back in, and she would resume her intended work of transporting civilians back and forth across the Atlantic. Unfortunately for the old vessel, the 1950s would issue in the arrival of the jet age. As a result, popularity in sea travel would drastically decline, and though the old ship would continue to operate for around another decade, through the 1960s, she was finally decommissioned, and boasted a rough career passenger total of around 2 million civilians and 810,000 soldiers. In 1967, the RMS Queen Mary was purchased by the city of Long Beach, who would set to work on renovations aimed at turning the ship into a hotel, museum, and event space. From the 1970s and onward, the Queen Mary would operate as a popular tourist destination and was even leased to Disney for a time. However, sadly, through the 80s and 90s, business would again decline, and the operation would fall upon hard times. In 1992, Disney would relinquish their lease, and the Queen Mary would close for a period. However, during its closure, in 1993, it would be honored on the National Register of Historic Places, after which interest in the old vessel would once again begin to grow, resulting, later the same year, in its reopening as a tourist attraction. Seemingly unable to catch a break, in 2020 the ship would close once again through the height of the COVID pandemic. However, interested parties would issue a slew of restorations and renovations, and she would open again at full capacity by 2023. In the present, the RMS Queen Mary remains open to the public, offering a wealth of educational materials, fine dining and drinks, a cafe, touring options, events, and much, much more. But it's not all fun and games aboard the Queen Mary, and according to local legends, the old ship is haunted by at least 100 different spirits, likely due to both soldiers and travelers who perished aboard over its many years of service. Incidentally, both staff and guests have reported extreme cold spots felt through the normally balmy heat of California summer, instances of doors opening and closing on their own, and both disembodied voices and foot or boot steps heard emanating from empty spaces or hallways. Disturbingly, two of the most prolific deaths to occur on site were that of one John Petter, who was crushed by a door during an emergency drill, and whose broken, blue coverall-clad apparition, which walks with a janky lean, has been known to appear suddenly from around corners, frightening all nearby, and whistling as if to warn them, and of an unnamed man who died when he grabbed a bottle that he thought was gin and chugged it, only for it to turn out to be cleaning fluid, and whose sickly, pale spirit has been discovered in various rooms, and has been known to ask for help with blood or vomit dripping from his mouth. One more disturbing tale tells that after her conversion to a troop ship, quarters were extremely cramped, causing a vicious rise in temperature, and in a good portion of the staff going half mad. Chillingly, it's claimed that after an altercation, a chef aboard the vessel was locked into his own oven and slowly roasted alive overnight. While there's no documentation of this incident, the story has been around since her days of service, and many have claimed to hear blood-curdling screams coming from the oven in the kitchen, usually long after dark. Also reported across the Queen Mary are accounts of bed sheets being ripped off of sleeping guests, faucets that turn on and off by themselves, and instances of personal effects that go missing and turn up later in strange places. Lastly, in 1942, and while retreating with another ship being the HMS Curaçao, the Queen Mary actually hit and split the Curaçao into two, resulting in the deaths of 329 of the smaller ship's crew, by either impact or hypothermia due to the waters they were plunged into. Occasionally, those aboard the Queen Mary have reported a loud crash followed by screaming, and pale ghostly figures have been sighted in her surrounding waters, seemingly staring up at those on deck. Saving the best for last, our fifth and final hunt has us hiking the trails of San Diego's infinitely famous Balboa Park. The ever-popular Balboa Park, which is placed in the heart of San Diego, California, is a 1,200-acre historic expanse that boasts the title of being the largest urban cultural park in the United States, whose bounds welcome tens of millions of visitors each year, and that harbors a reputation as one of America's finest cities' most haunted places. Historically, as San Diego grew through the 19th century, efforts aimed at the forced eviction of the land's native Kumeyaay people were put in place courtesy of greedy politicians and rich elite. However, one such settlement held strong, being Haddam's Village, which was placed in Florida Canyon, south of lands that now hold the Naval Medical Center of San Diego. Incidentally, this village was ran by one Jose Manuel Polton, or more affectionately, Haddam, and as the cityscape evolved, he would mold his neighborhood to suit the needs of native Californians and Baja Californians, who sought jobs and stable modern lifestyles. Also through the 19th century, Spain and later Mexico would begin setting aside large tracts of land for common use areas. And in 1835, Alta California officials would set a 1,400-acre tract of Pueblo lands that included Balboa Park inside for the future creation of recreational space. Incidentally, this marks Balboa Park as one of the oldest intentional rec spaces in the US. In 1845, a survey was performed in order to map out 47,000 acres locally. However, 3 years later, the Mexican-American War would result in Alta California being ceded to the US, resulting in all standing plans being scrapped. And it wasn't until February 15th of 1868 that the city's Board of Trustees was asked to create a park from two 160-acre tracts placed just north of the new town urban center. Subsequently, by May of the same year, a resolution was approved for a park consisting not just of these two initial tracts, but of 9 total plots that stretched 1,400 acres. Also through the late 1800s, native Californians and Bajenos began flocking to our aforementioned Kumeyaay village in search of sanctuary, work, and independence. Notably, this village would prosper until the early 1900s, when the neighborhood was demolished in preparation for the Panama-California Exposition of 1915. Much of the Balboa Park that we know today was designed and constructed around this exposition, and an assortment of architects, landscapers, and contractors would work together to accomplish its various features under the Expo's lead designer, Bertram Goodhue, who was renowned for his work on Gothic Revival-style structures in New York and Boston, and who would launch the creation of the park's various Spanish Baroque-style constructs, which were completed just in time for the highly successful and populated event that was so popular, it ran for an entire extra year. In 1935, Balboa Park would host its second big event in the form of the California Pacific International Expo, which, similar to the first, was so popular it would run for an additional year. Through World War II, park bounds would be handed over to the Department of the Navy for a time, and would act as a military base and training grounds. Following the war, the expanse would welcome a host of new structures and modernizations, and through the 1950s, a slew of buildings on site would be either modernized and preserved or torn down and replaced entirely. Through the 1960s and 70s, a series of educational venues and museums would be opened up across Balboa. In 1977, the park and its historic expo buildings were officiated as National Historic Landmarks, and later the same year, they would be added to the National Register of Historic Places. Sadly, through the 1980s and early 90s, crime within the park, including numerous murders and assaults, would increase, resulting in the implementation of patrols, cameras, and more lighting. Up into more recent times, Balboa Park has grown into one of the most popular public spaces in the US, and as of 2017, the state of California designated the site as a cultural district. Balboa Park remains open into the present, and offers a range of museums, attractions, events, tours, educational plaques and materials, and much, much more. Chillingly, ghost stories surrounding Balboa Park center around the deaths that have transpired within its bounds. And for years now, visitors to the site have reported a host of frightening ghostly activity, including disembodied voices heard on the winds or from its old structures, shadowy figures spied drifting unnaturally about after dark, and instances of objects, doors, and windows moving or opening and closing by themselves. Circa 1946, when the park was still in use by the Navy, the expanse held a hospital that received wounded soldiers from overseas, and it's estimated that at this time, said medical facility held around 20,000 soldiers, some of whom didn't make it. Incidentally, it's believed the spirits of these soldiers, not yet ready to leave our world, might still linger, and reported across the whole of park lands are troops of men in uniform sighted at a distance, either marching around or performing various training exercises, shouted ghostly commands and the sounds of old choppers touching down in areas that are completely empty, and the ever-disturbing moaning and crying of injured men. Additionally, several more terrifying stories detail accounts of individuals running into men clad in World War II garb all throughout the park that they think at first to be actors, and that have even held lengthy conversations before they turn to reveal grisly wounds and then fade away into nothingness. Informal investigations of the park have yielded high EMF levels even in areas with no electricity, EVPs and odd silhouettes captured in photography and video, and hits on communicative devices such as Ouija boards and spirit boxes. And several thermal grids that have been set up have detected deformed, hominid abominations that lurk in the shadows, and that are so terrifying to behold, they've sent several crews running. Another haunted hotspot in Balboa is that of its cherished Villa Montezuma Museum. Now, as the story goes, this hotspot is not only haunted by various entities tied to its artifacts, but also by its former owner, Jesse Shepherd, who, in life, was a renowned pianist and known spiritualist, and who was famous for conducting high-profile seances. Those who have braved the museum have reported the eerie sounds of chains or inexplicable clinking and scratching noises, sudden temperature changes, and the sighting of the form of a woman in the music room, where Shepherd held his occultist sessions. Lastly, in more secluded areas of Balboa, several cryptids have been sighted, including hooded figures that match the description of dark watchers or sentinels, which have been sighted in the Santa Lucia Mountains, and skinwalkers, both of which that have been known to follow the living at great lengths, and that some claim are fond of chasing those who get too close. Thanks for joining me on this journey through some more of California's most haunted places. If you enjoyed hearing my histories and ghost stories, subscribe to my channel, throw this upload a like, and share me with anyone you feel could use a good scare. I'll see you all next time, and stay spooky.